Good.
So good evening and welcome to everyone to the City of Lake Forest Park City Council special meeting for Monday, September 30th. And at this time, I'd like to ask Councilmember Riddle to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember, thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, everyone. And with that, I'd entertain a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Are there any comments or discussion? Hearing none, it is adopted by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. With that, we're moving on to public comments. I got to read my little blurb here. The council will not be accepting online public comments. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the council on agenda items or any other topic the council might have purview or control over. However, the mayor or council may not respond to comments from the public. If the comments are of a nature that the council does not have influence or control over, thank you, Phil, then the mayor may request the speaker suspend their comments. Council may direct staff to follow up on items brought up by the public. Comments are limited to a 3-minute time limit. Thank you. Nigel Kiefer, you're welcome to join the podium. Welcome.
Good afternoon. The meeting notice said, your input is vital in shaping the future of our community. Personally, I'm on to your shuck and jive and don't believe you give a damn on citizen input. For example, this year the city acquired the new waterfront park properties on Beach Drive at a cost of $5,953,403. The budget 2025 allocation is $1,100,000. The 2026 allocation is $7,744,339. The total capital project cost being estimated to be $14,797,742, all to be taxpayer funded. Prior to the enabling resolution 1757 and the memorandum of agreement dated 12/12/2019, there was no public notice, no project scope, no cost estimate, no property appraisal. Throughout the acquisition process, there was no notice or public hearing in violation of the Open Publics Meetings Act. Years earlier, in 1998, the city concealed from the public the acquisition of the neighboring Morris Line Creek property on Beach Drive. Last month, the city approved the acquisition of a 2.43 acre property at 19001 40th Place Northeast at a purchase price of $1.6 million, allegedly funded by the Capital Improvement Fund. A concerning feature of this transaction is the life estate of the seller and the absence of public access provision during the estate. An apparent gift of public funds. Here again, the mayor and city council and others had knowingly concealed the acquisition from the public and approved this capital project without notice or a public hearing in violation of the OPMA. Violating the OPMA is a pattern and common practice of the Lake Forest Park. Elected officials, the Parks Board, legal counsel, and administrators. I look forward to the day these OPMA violations are adjudicated, together with the other issues of malfeasance and fraud perpetrated against the taxpaying public. And I would like to say, I just noticed that there's no public access on your new park. that I mentioned in here. I'm glad you guys finally figured it out. Thank you.
Okay, well, with that, is there anyone else in council chambers? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Mr. Mayor, there was one written comment that was received from Matthew Sun requesting the council amend the proposed budget to fund a climate manager.
Okay, thank you very much. Did he request reading it into the record or we're?
Well, he labeled it as public comment for
Okay.
tonight.
Well, thank you. Would you like the record or is it?
It's
Here, I'm happy to read it.
It's fairly lengthy.
Oh, okay. Well, we really appreciate Mr. Sun's comments and just thank you. No, I'm happy to read this.
Yep.
This is nice. Dear Lake Forest Park City Council members, I'm a homeowner in Lake Forest Park and volunteer member of the LFP Climate Action Committee. I'm writing to ask all of our council members to support amending the mayor's proposed budget to include funding for a city climate manager, potentially in cooperation with nearby cities. I believe this investment in the city's future take priority in the budget for these reasons. One, the LFP CAC survey results show citizens in Lake Forest Park are overwhelmingly very concerned about climate change and would like to see the city prioritize partnering with neighboring cities to help residents transition away from fossil fuels. Many citizens would like to switch to electric vehicles, bike, or take public transportation, more, but do not feel LFP has adequate infrastructure to allow them to do so. Passing the climate action plan without devoting resources to carrying it out would be in contrast to the wishes of these citizens. Number two, 79% of survey respondents report being affected by wildfire smoke due to climate change. And 71% report they have had to limit their outdoor activities in the summer due to health risks of this increasing smoke prevalence. LFP residents choose this community for its beautiful outdoors and want to see the city government take seriously our health and health of our children. Three, the City Council of Kenmore has demonstrated its commitment to climate action by hiring a climate manager and recently declaring climate change state of emergency. Number four, climate manager would be able to write grant applications which would offset the cost of their compensation as well as help pay for city pay for green infrastructure improvements. I understand budgetary decisions are never easy, but every dollar spent on preventing and mitigating climate change will save hundreds in future harm to our community. Thank you very much for your work and consideration, Dr. Matthewson. Thank you, council member. Okay, with that, are there any other? Okay, we'll declare public comment closed. And with that, we're moving on to options for fleet vehicles. Administrator Hill, and he's looking for a clicker. Starting.
Evening, council, mayor. As you know, in past bienniums, well, forever, the city has attempted to purchase vehicles on a cash basis, buying what we can afford when we can. During COVID years, we funded the fleet fund at 50%, further putting us behind the 8 ball. We already had an aging fleet and issues of replacement prior to the COVID pandemic. And so what I've got for you for consideration as you go through your budget process is a fleet replacement strategy that looks at taking out a loan for the vehicles. And so I'll walk you through this kind of step by step. At the end, I've got a spreadsheet that show you how the cash flow would work out over several biennium. Just a reminder, you can only commit the city to this upcoming biennium purchase. And, you know, even though it would be probably a 5-6 year term on the loan, future councils would have to make decisions in their upcoming bienniums, 27, 28, 29, 30 for those purchases. So this is a strategy, but we'll implement one biennium at a time. So as you've already heard, police has, these are immediate needs. There are needs beyond this, but these are the immediate needs: 6 patrol cars, 4 administration cars, and a transport van. Public Works has an F-550 they need to replace, an F-550 dump truck, and then 2 pickups. You've also heard that 6 police vehicles are over 100,000 miles, 5 of them are over 10 years old, and WCIA is changing their coverage beginning in 2025. They will no longer be insuring our vehicles for replacement value. If they are 10 years or older, it'll be depreciated cash value only, and that will be that minus our deductible, which is $1,000 if they're in an accident and deemed totaled. The F-550 is 16 years old, and our international dump truck is 27 years old. And then the increasing maintenance costs and working with NUD, they are recommending, and we have for this upcoming biennium added 15% to our maintenance costs due to the aging of our fleet. Wow, that's small. Sorry for that. I'm glad you have it in front of a screen, and I'm not going to read it to you because it's rough. But this is Public Works and so I had Public Works Director Perigo and Chief Harden go through and using access that we have online for public vehicles, go and build the vehicles that are included in those vehicles that you saw as far as the immediate need. And so you see the base value in 2024 for the 550, the 550 chassis for the dump truck, and then Silverados were spec'd at the time. These may end up being F-150 Lightnings. But at this point in time, until we get the charging stations done, we haven't fulfilled that order this year. Then we've added tax, diesel regs. This won't come into play until 2027. So if we kick any of these vehicles out, it is anticipated that those could add up to $25,000 in cost to a diesel vehicle, which some of our vehicles have got to be diesel. And then the upfitting, that's the all the bells and whistles you put on it. And for the dump truck, obviously the dump portion of that. So we took a base total, and then working with Steve over at NUD, he recommended 10.1 inflation factor for each year going out. Obviously that could come in much lower, probably, hopefully not higher. So just to kind of give us an idea of how to budget going forward. Did the same thing for the police department. So you'll see it says patrol cars ~6. That's just the value for one. That was just for bookkeeping purposes, keep track of how many we needed as we worked into the spreadsheet, 4 admin cars, and then the transport van. And as the chiefs brought to you before, the transport van does not meet current requirements, but we are grandfathered in, and honestly, we should buy the right thing to transport incarcerated. So anyway, that works through the same thing. Obviously, no diesel reg requirements. There are no diesel in the fleet for police upfitting. As you remember, in the 2 vehicles that the police department purchased this year, upfitting cost more than we had budgeted. And so they went to the foundation and got those additional funds. And this takes us out through many years. And so the program that would fund this type of a loan for the city is through the state treasurer's office. It's called the local program. So fittingly, these rates you'll see on the left side, the local rates, you see it for real estate. You can use it to buy real estate and equipment. 3.29% at 5, 7, and 10 years. Those are based off of bonds that they sold in on June 5th of this year. So that was the realized rate that they got on those bonds. So this, as it says in the disclaimer, is no guarantee that you're going to get 3.29%, in 2025 if we choose to move forward with this. But they've remained fairly stable. But we've seen interest rates drop 0.5%. The understanding is the feds will drop it another 1% in 2025. So things are going to probably start to change at the local government or the local program level. Not quite sure exactly what that'll mean to us. And so I just walked through. So we took for 25-26, the recommendation is to replace 3 patrol cars and the van that has a value of $348,577, 6-year term, assuming a rate of 3.29%, although it'll probably sneak up a little bit on us. That gives you an annual debt service cost. Did the same thing for the public works vehicles. The 550, that says international. We're not going to replace it with an international. It'll be another 550 chassis with dump added to it, and then Silverado or whatever vehicle fits the need for the department. Came to a total value, same rate and term, and then an annual cost. And we will send this out to you. Sorry, I just finished this morning. 27-28 did the same thing. This realizes the 10.1% increase. Obviously, it's still looking at the 3.29%. So that things are gonna change from there. And then the same thing for a 2930. If we go back in 27, 28, that's the last purchase based on the immediate needs that are identified today that we need for public works. I can guarantee you something else will come up in the future. So then in 2930, the only purchase is the 4 admin cars in the PD. We felt that admin cars could wait longer. They get less of a beating. 2 of them are new. They're the detective Ford Escapes. They're a hybrid vehicle. The chief's vehicle is limping along just dandy. That was previous chief's vehicle, and it's quite aged, but it's serving him sufficiently. And so we put these at the end. So, wow, Matt, can you make that a little larger? Can you maybe kill the attendees on the side and make that as big as you can? In this current biennium, the council budgeted $288,000 that went into the fleet. That has purchased the 2 vehicles in PD. It has purchased 1 F-550 for Public Works. That's currently on order with Bud Clary Ford. And then it would have purchased the Lightning, but it would be kind of foolish to go out and buy a vehicle we have no way to charge. And so what this looks at going forward as far as debt service is increasing that $288,000 the council put in this current biennium to $350,000. This would be at the start of each biennium. You will see that if the council at the time chose to make the next set of purchases in 2028, 29, there's a deficit even at the $350,000. There's a lot of factors that could change between now and then, the number of vehicles that you choose to purchase. Maybe the police department gets something different from the foundation. But just looking at this on how could we replace these vehicles, you would need at least $350,000 a biennium. And then you need that bump in the 28, 29, at the end of 28, and then the start of the 29, 30 budget to carry this out to the end of those purchases. But you'd see that takes us until 2031. If I can read. Yes, sorry, it's blurry from here.
Yes.
To complete these purchases. And so in talking with Director Vaughn, there's a lot of moving parts on this. We don't know where the rates are going to end up. We don't know what vehicle prices truly will do. One thing I read this morning was in the Seattle Times about vehicles, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and how the prices are coming down, how prices are coming down on electric vehicles. There may be a lot of things that shift over time to where we see operationally our costs come down as well as maintenance. And so this is how things are today. If we can purchase hybrid vehicles or electric vehicles where they make sense, we will. In looking at the F-150, the price for that is comparable on the state contract to the Silverados. Just how well it serves the needs. If we actually use one of those trucks for plowing, I'm not sure the Lightning would be the best for plowing, but technology is going to change. And so this is the debt schedule that we put together for your consideration to just see what you would commit yourself to in this biennium, how much it would cost you over the previous biennium, and what future councils are going to need to consider as they sit in your place or as you sit there again next biennium. So with that, I'm here for any questions as well as Director Vaughn and Director Perigo.
Great. Thank you very much, Administrator Hill. Colleagues, questions for Mr. Hill? Councilmember Riddle.
So I have 2 questions. One, the current rates based off of the June bond that they did. Do you know if they issue bonds on a regular basis, or is it as is, so we can't predict it?
It's kind of all over the place.
Okay.
They'll issue them. I think they issue them twice a year, and they'll issue them for as little or as much as you need. If you only want to buy one vehicle, they'll do that. If you want to buy 10, they'll do that. And so it's just working with them, but it all depends on what the bond market's doing at the time. And we've had a very favorable bond market up to this point.
And then the next thought is, if for something happens from a revenue standpoint, are these the kinds of loans that we can pay off early if we have an opportunity? There's no
penalty for paying them early. Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember, colleagues. Yeah, Councilmember Good.
Maybe a silly question, but is there any way to use some of the traffic cam money, since some of the officers do work on the traffic can their vehicle be purchased on the traffic cam money?
There's a potential, so that you remember in the mayor's proposed budget, there's the addition of a traffic enforcement officer. If, as I've talked with the chief, as long as that individual is solely to that cause and their vehicle, yes, that would be a qualifying. So there's some things in there, but that's an addition. That's not the fleet that we have today. And the actual patrol vehicle that we have for traffic enforcement is a brand new vehicle, maybe a year or two old. But yes, the short answer is yes, in the future to replace some vehicles, but the rest of them, maybe a small percentage, we would have to talk to the bill sponsor and our legislative lobbyists and delegation, not to step on any toes, get out ahead of ourselves on something like that.
Councilmember, excellent question, not a silly one. So thank you for that. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, can you explain where that 10.1% inflation factor is coming from? Because it seems like, isn't inflation back down to around 2-3% annually?
That's the cost that they've seen fleet vehicles going up at NUD. And so that was reported by Steve and Skylar, I can't remember his last name, sorry if he's listening. He said to plan for about a 10.1% increase on vehicles in the near term for fleet. That could be an overstatement, but it's based off of his many years of experience over there purchasing vehicles. So it's not tied directly to the inflation that you're talking about as far as a lot of the cost for goods and services. Cars just continually seem to outpace that inflation.
Councilmember Furtani.
So I'm just noticing in 2030, the debt service is alone for just for the cars is going to be something like $250,000. Can the city handle that?
Well, that's why we're plugging in $350,000. You'll see that we never hit zero, but you're going to have to counsel, especially in this biennium, if you were to choose to do it, and the upcoming biennium, you would have to allocate $350,000 to cover that. And then you'll see those 2 years. If you didn't choose, if council chose not to make those purchases in 28, 29, that next set of purchases that you see there coming on, then you wouldn't need those additional funds. But yes, you would be committing to the $350,000 a year. And that could fluctuate based on cost savings, different allocations from different funds. This is just at the time this was being put together, that's the money that we can count on at that point in time.
I can ask.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
and so these payments are like regular car payments where you'd pay a monthly balance kind of thing?
I think we pay on this either every 6 months. I can't remember the debt service, but yearly, that's what we owe, whether.
Yeah, so the reason
I don't think it's monthly.
Okay, the reason that I asked the question is just because of that cash flow issue, right? I mean, will we have enough cash on hand then to actually make those kinds of payments if it's like biannually?
We currently do have the cash flow on hand to make those. It's just allocating it in the budget.
Okay.
You've got, the city has plenty of reserves and can make the payments. It's just knowing that $350,000 in the upcoming budget is probably coming out of unallocated fund balance based on our deficit.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues, Councilmember Good.
How do you buy those vehicles? Do they have to be brand new? Can they be new, but maybe used?
They're brand new. It's on a state contract and they have dealers that they work with. So these prices have been pre-negotiated. There was what am I trying to say? They've been vetted. There was an RFQ put out and then
That was
like
my
Director
second
Perigo,
question.
when he used the online portal, you go in and you spec exactly what your jurisdiction needs. Some need more than others in their vehicles. And if anybody wants a detail of what he's put into that, we could provide that for you as well. Same with the chief.
Councilmember Rizzo, would you-
Councilmember Bodie or Deputy Mayor Bodie was first. I'm
Oh.
patient. I'm patient.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Bodie.
Yes, I just wanted to say that to me, this is part of the cumulative look at policing expenses. So of course, we have expenses for public works too. But to me, I just wanted to make the observation that when we look at the list of increased costs of paying for policing to keep our community safe, this is another situation where we have increased costs coming forward in the future. And it's partly because we basically have limped along with older vehicles, and the WCIA new policy has caused us to re-examine the old and very old vehicles that we have in our fleet, because we won't be able to get them replaced if they no longer are working for us. But I did just want to make that observation. I start to think about dispatch and public defender services and increased salaries. And I just wanted to say, to me, this is just yet another component of the increased cost of policing, partly because we've deferred these costs for a while in the interest of economy. So just wanted to flag that, because I know we're going to be talking about policing costs down the road.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bodie. Mr. Lebo.
Thank you. Could you do several things for me on the spreadsheet? So could you, for example, total police and public works separately, do a subtotal by biennium and then total for the cost overall?
So,
And then,
so that's what these two slides do. Is that, does that get to your
yeah,
point?
if you could just put it all on the other slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
It actually is on my working spreadsheet. I just
Yeah,
cleaned it
the
up for
total-
this presentation.
Subtotal down and then total across, and then it's not clear if you go back to that slide. Can you put in, was the 350 is not in the proposed 25, 26?
It is, you'll see down below Director Vaughn put it down. So you see the blue line across the bottom. That's where that's pumped in, that 350,000. So in 25, 26 is up top in green.
Yeah.
And then we put it down below just to use that as a running total across the top of funds on hands for vehicles. And you see in that outer year 20.
But for 25, 26, it's the same, isn't it? It's about putting money in as a biennium for these purchases.
Yeah, and it's $350,000 listed there in 2025 in green.
Right, but if you put it down with the blue, then it would be consistent,
Okay,
because that's
yeah,
what you're,
all right.
so,
Yeah.
and then subtotal it, so that's what would be proposed for the biennium, as I understand it. And the 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, yeah. In the 27, 28, though, you're proposing to spread it across two years?
So in 27, 28, you need the 350,000. And then if I remember in
Plus the
28,
90.
there's another 90,000 that you would need to make debt service work. So it's 440,000. We just wanted to keep the 350 constant and show you where you would need additional bumps of dollars.
Okay, but if you could put it down and then subtotal, then it would be consistent about what we're being asked for the biennium. And is the 350 currently in on our budget request?
It is.
It is,
So the
okay.
budget you have before you has $350,000 programmed.
So the other way to think about it is if we didn't do this, but we wanted to purchase this, then it would be 350 per biennium.
Correct.
Okay.
Except for in the outer, but that one middle
Except for the
biennium.
bumps that would occur in
Yep.
28 and 29.
Yes.
Is there any thought to put this into the proposed levy? Think of these as levy costs on a 6-year term.
Yeah, I think as you talk about that, that's definitely one of the costs that you're covering that's one more cost of police services. So.
Okay.
Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
The housekeeping, if you're going through this Excel spreadsheet.
And I hope she's taking great notes
Great
because I'm
notes.
standing over here. I'm not gonna remember this.
Fair enough.
The vehicle starting in the 28, you call it 3 patrol vehicles. I think those are the 3. Are those patrol vehicles or?
Yeah, they're
are we
patrol
we're
vehicles. So we
splitting them?
need 6. So in the
Okay,
first
okay, so
biennium,
it
it's
is
3
split.
plus a van, and then the next biennium, it's 3. And then the last biennium is the
Is the-
4 admin vehicles.
Okay, never mind, then you had it right. I just didn't follow.
Colleagues, Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, a couple of questions about the insurance. Does the insurance cover a replacement due to normal wear and tear, or only if it's damaged in a collision?
Only if it's damaged in the collision and deemed totaled.
And can you tell historically, like what fraction of our vehicles have gone out of service because of a collision versus just wear and tear?
I don't know of any, at least in my tenure, of any that have been totaled. We've had some accidents, but they've all been repaired. This could change. I mean, after 10 years, if something gets totaled, that's not a lot of value because it's as soon as the value to replace to fix it exceeds what they would give you dollar value as total.
Okay, and then one last related question. Are there any, of all the vehicles on the spreadsheet, are there any that are on here solely because they'd be over 10 years old and not because of any concerns about their usability?
Everything that's on here, I mean, every police vehicle that we have is consistently in the shop. We can get you numbers to show you, but costs are going up, and that's why Steve at NUD has said add another 15%. We're continually pushing that budget just for repairs. But are any of them going to drop dead tomorrow? No. But you know, as the chief mentioned in his presentation, they are the police officers' offices, and you know, if they become unreliable to the point that they're always in the shop, you know, I have asked him to get rid of the two that he's still holding on to that are supposed to be surplus by council and sold because they've been replaced by the Tahoes. You go down vehicles, what we've done in the past is then a sergeant or a lieutenant is giving up their vehicle. We haven't gotten to where the chief had to give up his vehicle to keep vehicles on the road. And I don't think his would qualify anymore anyway, but that's the dilemma we've been in before, where one of the lieutenant vehicles is now out on the street. So reliability is important, but
I suppose where I'm going with all this is that if there are vehicles that are showing signs of age, they should be priority for replacement. But otherwise, I'm not sure that this new insurance policy should be driving us to replace too many vehicles too quickly.
it's not. So when I put this together, WCI had not made that announcement. The 3 vehicles in PD that you're seeing and the vehicles in Public Works are being recommended to be replaced because they are the oldest. They break down the most. Yeah, they spend more time in the shop than anything else. And can't remember the numbers, but the chief could tell you which ones they are, and it's based off of how often they're in the shop.
Okay.
And the van, the fact that it's not appropriate to be transporting people in it because it doesn't have the proper separation for the different types of inmates that are being transported.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues, Mr. Lebo.
Is there any thought to sort of spreading out the payments in the sense that increased revenue may generate ability to have more than 350,000 per biennium, so that, for example, if you said 350 plus 10% every biennium, and then some way to spread out this so it's not these large jumps in 28, 29.
Yeah, and like I said, this was just to try and get it in the time frame that the 2 directors were saying they needed it. Well, director and police chief, sorry.
Okay.
You can adopt any strategy that you want. This is just getting them replaced as quickly as you can, because if you look at that, we're starting to push almost 10 years again by the time we get done.
Yes.
And we got to start circling back around at some point. And if we lose a vehicle that's 10 years old and it's a total loss, that's going to be a cost that we'll have. So this was trying to catch up faster than we probably can, honestly.
Okay, a couple other things. It's kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. The other is, could you go back 6 years and show how much we allocated and what we purchased?
Yeah.
To give us a reference for, you know, what have we done over the last 2 biennium?
Yeah.
Or actually over the last 3 biennium.
Yep, we can do that, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember.
I can tell you in the COVID biennium, we didn't purchase anything, and we took half of the dollars away to help, you know, limp the city along and provide service. So there were no purchases during that, hence part of the problem. And
So part of it, if I may, is really about education and storytelling. And that is that it's not just looking forward, but understand where we are in the past to give us and inform us about where we are going into the future.
Yep.
Because if you look back and we said we spent all this money 6 years ago, you know, it might be a different story, but I suspect you spent less.
yeah, understood.
Yeah, Councilmember Riddle.
The story I remember is that administration was bringing us a replacement plan because all their vehicles were starting to have trouble and they were seeing the cliff. And they were bringing the replacement plan, and then COVID happened. So this is, I think it's something that has been really put on the back burner for quite some time due to funding.
Yep.
Thank you, both of you. And actually, it's a great segue because to Councilmember Goldman's comment about whether a vehicle has been taken out of service because of being totaled, it's been more than 2 decades, if I recall correctly. The other thing I would say is that looking backwards is really important because there have been, as long as I was a policymaker, this was sort of kick the can down the road. And so there are unfunded needs, honestly, that occurred in the past that we're kind of catching up on. The other thing I want to say on a positive note, it really makes me very happy to look at this on a 10-year schedule, because in previous iterations of budget discussions way back when, we were looking at a very sort of myopic kind of view, 3-4 years maybe, and looking way beyond election cycles and way beyond the constraints of this body and looking at the needs of the community. This does that. And I think that whatever form it takes with you all in your decision-making process, this is the kind of framework I think is a very good way to move forward. And I thank the team for putting it together, because it really is a positive way forward. Colleagues, other questions for Administrator Hill? Great.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Bill, appreciate it. Okay. And let's see. I just wanted to check we moved on, but Deputy Mayor Bodie, did you have any last thoughts that you wanted to throw into the mix? I didn't see your hand raised, but I wanted to check with you.
No, I appreciate the questions from my colleagues and also the idea of looking backwards, because we did put everything on hold for years. So I think that's part of the story. And I was trying to say less artfully than some of my colleagues that this to me is another example of the increased future costs of policing. And therefore, when we have the levy conversation, it seems to me, one component of that. But I think to make that point, we have to show the history too. So thank you, colleagues. Excellent questions.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. With that, we're moving on to item B, proposed 2025-2026 biennial budget, council deliberations and recommendations. Colleagues, and Deputy Mayor, would you like to chime in first here, or how would you like to proceed?
I think I should go last. First of all, I'm not in the room, and second of all, as Deputy Mayor, I'd like to hear from my colleagues before I chime in.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Colleagues, you have initial thoughts? There's a lot of time to have a conversation about the budget. I would just bookmark something relative to the climate action manager. We have something percolating that's been percolating for quite a while, and we're working on that. And I think we'll have more information on that at the climate action meeting tomorrow. Is that correct, Mr. Hill? Or am I jumping the gun here?
I'm sorry, I was reading an
So
email.
climate action manager.
Do you want to talk about it tonight? We certainly can.
Mr. Vice Chair Tony, do you want to talk about it?
All right, I'm willing to talk about it.
Sure.
I will need some technical support from the city administrator. But
Preliminary,
yes.
Very.
So you're hearing this hot off the press. We have heard a lot of comments about hiring a climate action manager from the public, and really appreciate your comments on it and the fact that you're so passionate about it. So the city administrator and the mayor got together and had some sit-down talks and came up with a great plan, in my view, which is, if you look at all of our utility taxes, we tax the water, tax cable, tax sewer, right, stormwater, and so forth.
Yeah.
The one that does not have a tax is the waste services. So in other words, the Republic Services has the contract right now. They have the bill. We have the ability to implement utility tax on that. And the point is, I can't think of a more appropriate source for funding a climate action manager than directly related to our waste that we produce. One of the things that's happening, of course, with King County right now is that Cedar Hills has a projected lifetime of 2040. They're trying to extend that by a couple of years by literally tearing down the administration buildings that are at the Cedar Hills site and turning that into a landfill as well. So you can see that we're in a pretty desperate spot to actually find more places to put our own garbage. And I think part of having a climate action manager, yes, it's inventorying the greenhouse gas emissions, but greenhouse gases come from many different sources. And the fact is that our solid waste is one of those sources. And so being able to account and measure and then report on this is vital for this effort that's going to be kind of imposed on us once King County decides how they're going to handle solid waste. So by placing a utility tax on the solid waste services right now, I think this is a great way to basically start the ball rolling on implementing a lot of the other recommendations that the Climate Action Committee has made regarding how we can reduce our consumption and how, therefore, we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions the city makes, not just at the city services level, but also the city as a whole.
Thank you, Vice Chair Furtoni, and not to put you on the spot, Administrator Hill. This is something to give credit where credit is due. This was Administrator Hill's idea a couple of weeks ago. We've been trying to work on some numbers. Actually, he's been working on some numbers about how this would proceed. Initial comments from council leadership was this is very, very positive. Makes a lot of sense. Again, to your point, applying the tax from the source directly to what the result is, what the need is always appropriate, in keeping to Director Vaughn's comments about keeping our money green. It makes a lot of sense. It's about making sure that it's going straight to what the impacts are, to alleviate the impacts. So we don't have specific numbers here right now, but there is an opportunity for us to consider, you all to consider paying for the climate action manager, recognizing there's a period of time of implementation for any kind of tax situation, and funding that with that kind of revenue. Deputy Mayor Bodie. I'm sorry.
I was going to add a little detail to this, just a little bit background. So I can't take all the credit for it. One of our neighboring cities has already done this, and in speaking with their city manager, that is how they're paying for their climate manager. That and some other things. They have instituted 10% tax on that utility. It's a little steep. As I've run some initial numbers, currently I only have residential, should have commercial and multifamily by tomorrow. Residential on its own would more than pay for a climate manager position. So what we'll be putting together are some cost scenarios for you, what each revenue source, I guess you call it revenue source, commercial, multifamily, and single family would generate. I've spoken to City Attorney Pratt. We would need to update our definition of what gross wages are for entities based on what she's researched from other cities. And this, as the mayor said, this is the good color green. This goes into your general fund. And so it can definitely pay for that. It depending on the rate that you picked, if that was beyond just the cost of the position, might be able to implement some programs. But like the mayor said, it's too early to tell, too early to throw some numbers out, but we are doing the background research and we'll bring that to you during this budget process. But it is promising. It is another tax, and that's something that you'll have to deliberate. And what's the appropriate amount and what you want to pay for with it, just the position. Let the position get grants and pay for the rest that way. But we'll have all that for you hopefully here in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. And to be very clear, this administration is not proposing a 10% tax on solid waste. Deputy Mayor Bodie. I think you're muted, Lori.
I am,
There
thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on this, and would this stay in the budget provisos, or would we actually include it in the budget in Maine, recognizing that there's a lot of work to be done to see about timing and the implementation details? Have you thought about whether it would remain in the provisos or whether it would be part of the budget in Maine?
Mr. Hill.
I would recommend that it stay in the proviso. world, just because we don't know enough at this point in time. And as Director Vaughn will tell you about the previous utility taxes that you put in place, you don't know exactly when that cash will start to flow. We also have to have some discussions with Republic Services if council chooses to do this. If this causes them any operational expenditures to increase by more than $5,000, and we have to do good faith negotiations with them on what that does to the rate. And so there are some potentially unintended consequences that could come as a result that we would need to explore with them. So to be able to say it would flow January 1st or July 1st, I couldn't say, because we have not broached this with our provider.
I completely support that approach. That was kind of where I was going. It seemed to me we had many questions and issues, so we could still make it a more detailed budget proviso with some of that background information. But I think that would be a good way to go with it. So I like this concept. I think it's creative. I also think it would be good to have someone who would be a subject matter expert on solid waste. Too, perhaps that could be part of the portfolio of this individual, since we'd be looking at our waste stream for part of the funding source. But I just wanted to weigh in and support the proviso approach because of all the details yet to be settled.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bodie. And to the credit of Vice Chair Furtani, he's already drafted a proviso, which is, we'll have to get some numbers together to get there, but he is already ahead of all of us on this one. So it's fantastic. Colleagues, other questions about this thinking? There's nothing that has to be decided at this moment. Okay, I'm sorry, Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, I'm supportive. I'm really glad that leadership has been looking at this, and I've spoken about the need for a climate manager, and the public has definitely spoken about it. I'm wondering if we go through the proviso route, and it might be 6-12 months before this is implemented, do we have any mechanism to bring the climate manager on board earlier? Is there another fund we can tap to hire them sooner? And then basically say, well, then your salary will transition over to this garbage tax.
Interesting question. I'm
You-
gonna throw it out to the experts out here.
I
Director.
would just say that will increase your delta between revenues and expenditures in your funds. Really, it's stormwater and sewer are tapped out. General fund, is upside down. And so it would just, either something would have to go, or you would just have to take some additional funds out of an allocated fund balance to pay for it for 2025, or a portion thereof.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
And if we were to do something like that, I think we'd want more of like a term limited individual, because we wouldn't be knowing how long we'd be able to sustain that without additional revenue. So I think that may not be
And
ideal going forward, as we want someone who's invested in the community in that role.
And I would almost think if you were going to limit the term, you would want to wait to hire it, because you may not get the best candidates, or you may get no candidates at all, especially what we've seen in this market.
Yeah.
We can't hire people to save our lives. So
Yeah, good
Not
point.
Police officers.
Councilmember Good.
Maybe it's not the right time, but do we have a salary range for what this climate action manager would cost?
surrounding jurisdictions, salary range is somewhere in the $150,000 a year, but we're checking into that because those are probably old numbers. And so through AWC, we can check current salary rates, project what they're going to do next year. Plus then on top of that, you got to add about 40% for benefits. So it's not a cheap endeavor.
Would this person not need an assistant?
None of us have assistants, so no, they won't get an assistant.
I think Phil would be first in line for all the work he does.
I'd love an assistant, thank you. No, good question though. Yeah, fully loaded, we're 210 probably, somewhere in that. But again, that's really ballparking here.
Yeah,
we're
that's
spitballing.
just a swag at this point.
And there's opportunities, I think, too, with people coming out of master's programs and things like that. Mr. Goldman,
On point, is that 210 per year or per biennium?
Per year.
per year,
It is,
fully loaded.
Yeah, that's a yearly
It's not
value.
cheap. We just
That's looking at what surrounding cities have, 3 or 4 surrounding cities and what their salary range says, you know, that you can find easily online. That's not necessarily what they're being paid. And so a
Yeah.
little more research, a little more time for the HR director to vet that.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
And that's full-time,
Uh,
part-time might. That's for your consideration as well.
Um,
And a place to put them.
and I apologize for you putting you on the spot, Phil.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I thought it might come up. I was ready.
Moving on, colleagues, yes. Councilmember
Phil, you
Riddle.
just sort of,
Oh,
a place to put them.
Yes.
oh, yes,
Is there
please
any
put them, yeah.
facilities improvements that is addressing kind of our space constraint planned in the next biennium?
Other than bunk beds as desks, no, I mean, honestly, we are tapped out for space. You know, if this position was filled, I'm glad Mark's online. I see it landing in his department. And whether there's a
Panic,
way to
Mark.
wedge one more person in there, you know, our senior planners area is quite large, has an old drafting table. I don't think we really use drafting tables here anymore, other than to collect things that should go. So there might be some options. The court's doing the same dance right now. It's like, we're gonna need help. Where are we gonna put them? We're, you know, looking to have some space planners take a look and see what we can do. You know, when we did the furniture for City Hall, well, just for the conference rooms, you know, the provider of those did the space planning for us to make sure that everything would work. But we'll engage somebody who doesn't necessarily need us to buy their product, because we've got some product we can use, and just do some space planning for us. But yeah, it's definitely something we've got to figure out, especially with these new traffic camera tickets and desires to have additional positions. You remember where your mail used to be downstairs? That's now a desk. You know, there are spaces, we have created spaces, but there's also a list of positions, climate manager, GIS position. I mean, if we fill those, we got to find out where to put them, or City
Yeah.
Hall Annex, or 3rd floor penthouse. I'd be
Yeah.
happy to move.
So we're looking at with the request for the 2 police officers, 1 court clerk.
Yep.
Climate.
And I think at this
manager,
point, we
and-
can squeeze them in, but at some point,
Yeah,
seams are gonna burst, and we'll have to figure that
And
out.
it's gonna be hard to keep good people if they're exposed.
Yeah.
You know, it's gotta be a good working environment.
and putting a finer point on it too, we are bursting at the seams, there's no question. And the City Hall was not designed 20+ years ago to accommodate the level of staffing that we have currently. PD is, has some operational challenges because of, you know, how constrained the spaces are. And so that's something we have to really think about going forward. I think we have a capacity for a couple more, but again, to Mr. Hill's point, we're starting to think about bunk bed chairs, which is a little alarming.
If I could, that comment makes me want to point something out, and we'll discuss this in the future, but if you look in your budget, there is an 8-year a chart over the last 8 years of the FTEs in there. We have not added a single FTE in 8 years. We've only increased the amount of hours that some of them work to provide new and additional services. So we've been bursting at the seams for a long time, and now there is a need and a separate revenue source to add those positions, and where are we going to put them? So
As you're looking at that, if leasing additional space is an option, could you kind of bring it as a package with like
yeah, I think if we went beyond
a
this,
potential solution or just rough, again, swag numbers of what we might be getting ourselves into?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one quick reminder on point. Passports has also taken over both of our meeting rooms. Hugely successful service. Thank you very much, Matt. And we just have to figure out a way to make sure that our staff is supported and they have the resources that they need.
Yeah.
Mr. Lebo.
So I know there's a push on many agencies to bring staff back, but there are agencies that still have and found good value with remote work. And so I think we should take advantage of some of the changes that have occurred, and not everybody wants to commute into work every day. So I think we should be also looking at how we utilize our space appropriately. And there are administrative functions that many agencies have said, you know, those are to be done remotely.
yeah, we're still every department director is authorized to authorize up to 3 days in office, 2 at home. Director Vaughn has talked about, as she looks at her needs and things, if we need space. Some of her staff are part-time, so there is that flexibility. And if you have people out, could you make their days here, days at home, shared space? A lot of institutions do shared space. You don't even, where my wife works, you don't have a desk unless you're there at least 4 days a week. Otherwise, it's a hotel situation and you get what's available. So, and it does work quite well.
Thank you, Mr. Lebo. Colleagues, are there any other comments on point? Moving on to any other comments right now, initial about the proposed budget. I know it's a lot to digest. We're at your disposal to answer questions. Mr. Lebo.
A couple things. Could you give us sort of a trend, if you look back on Fen charts to say, what were our expenses over the last 3 biennia and where the trends are going, particularly with regard to our reserves? Because you have shown us in the past, for example, how reserves are reduced, and this budget proposes a $3 million reduction in our reserves, which is about 30% of our total reserves, not reflecting on the available reserves with regard to still maintaining a minimum. So it eats up considerable amount of our sort of above our minimum. And so I don't think we ever want to consider going below our minimum. So it would be nice to see what the trend lines are over the last, over the last 3 biennium and what we thought we were going to do. I am sort of conflicted on this budget because a $3 million hit to our reserves is quite significant and has been pointed out in the past is unsustainable. And I think what we are proposing is to work and develop a levy approach to this. I think it's important though for our constituents to understand that we have cut all the areas that we possibly can before we go to our citizens and ask for more money, and we have to be clear about what we're asking for. So I'm not sure I want to propose a budget that has a $3 million hit to our reserves.
Mr. Hill.
And to Councilmember Lebo's point, as we put that trend together, I think one thing that we need to do is recognize the significant bump in the last biennium due to lost revenues that came from ARPA funds. Story would look a lot different if we didn't have those. It's not that we didn't try and spend those and give those to community groups and local businesses. It just wasn't that much need, and we had that much in lost revenue and more. So I think we'll kind of carve that out and show that separately, kind of with ARPA, without ARPA. And
Right.
those
So
two
when you
trends
look at
like.
those trend lines and you look at that sort of chart, there's sort of this, you might think of it as the,
Ski slope.
no, I was thinking of an animal analogy. The snake eats the rat and the rat goes through. And so you see this bump in the middle, and that's the ARPA, not the terrible analogy.
It works.
But that you see this, as you look at the trend lines, you see these snakes running across, and the snake gets bigger as it goes along. But you see this sort of hump in the middle as a result of ARPA passing through our revenue stream.
Yep.
That without it, we would have been significantly hit hard.
All right.
Thank you.
So I am conflicted about this because there are some investments in the budget, particularly with staff and other resources, but I'm sort of like, well, I think we shouldn't need to make this as slim as we can and not just hope that we can get a levy increase. And I think that's part of the message that we give to the voters if we proceed to go that direction. It's always about value, and of course, going down that, there's always comparison with our adjacent cities and revenue streams and the whole thing that needs to be brought forward. But I'm not sure I want to increase travel in this biennium as an example. It's not a lot of money, but it goes to this question of if you're running a $3 million deficit over this biennium, should we be increasing travel or membership or whatever it is?
Sense.
Because there is the sort of correlation to our home budget. If you're running a deficit, you don't go on vacation.
Thank you, Mr. Lebo. Appreciate it. Vice Chair Furtoni.
And to the point about the making the investments, it's not really an option not to get the NPDES permit. So this is a question for Administrator Hill, I think. Is so if we weren't to fund the NPDES position, whatever we end up calling it, project manager or what have you, would we have to contract out to a third party consultant?
We already have three
Mhm.
consultants on contract that do that work. Director Perigo and Project Manager Phillips are working on a spreadsheet and identifying what costs would come out of those contracts as related to keeping them in. And initial estimates are that we would save more than we would spend on that position, but I don't have the final numbers. So,
Right. So
but
that,
either way, the work has to be done.
that has to be done. Absolutely. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Colleagues. Yeah, Mr. Lebo.
So part of that is, and you've sort of talked about it verbally, but where we are, for example, proposing to have additional staff such as a manager for the NPDES or for court, it would be great to show, here's the cost for it and here's the revenue stream for that. So if you think about it as they're add-ons, and when you add something, there is a revenue stream that goes with it. So think of it as ideally it's there's a revenue to pay for the expenditure. And I can't say it's neutral because in some cases it is an increase in taxes to do it, but that there's a revenue stream identified that goes with it.
And to your point, honestly, I already have a 3-slide slideshow that goes to this for, especially for that new position in PDS and how that, because I feel I wasn't exactly clear the other night when I was trying to explain to council how, if you have one, it offsets the other. And so we're working with that. Director Vaughn's been getting me the cost allocations per budget so we can put that together for you. So that is coming. So you can help you understand that.
Right, and so that would, same thing with court and police, that how you identify the revenue streams that go with that.
So that, if you look at the presentation
So-
I did the other night, if that is not enough detail, I can get you more detail, but it's for those positions, it's completely that new 002 fund.
Yeah.
And that was shown on the last 2 slides.
I'll take a look at it.
All right.
Oh, yes, Councilmember Golden. I'm swiveling here.
Yeah, so I want to follow up on something I brought up at the last meeting. And so kind of following on from what Councilmember Lebo said, I agree that a $3 million loss for the general fund over 2 years is substantial. So where can we tighten? And there aren't that many places, but I want to come back to lobbying. And when I brought up lobbying, there was a very strong defense of our federal lobbyist. I did not hear an equally strong defense of our state lobbyist. And so I want to bring this up, that if we have to make tough choices and we can't afford everything, is that something that we could cut with the understanding that A, we would have to do more kind of personal touch with our legislators, and we'd have to rely on groups like AWC to represent our interest in aggregate. But it seems like, if we have to cut something, I would rather cut a consultant than cut an internal staff position.
Thank you, Councilmember. I can take this one, and then Mr. Hill, if you would fill in any gaps. It's an excellent question, Councilmember. I would say going back to the really lean times 12, 13 years ago, right after the recession, that any lobbying had been cut completely. And we slowly brought it back after we brought up the levels of the reserves, the reserve numbers for requirements, if you will, over the years at currently to 16%, if I'm not mistaken, for the general fund. And previously it was considerably lower. And the challenge is that the lobbying that takes place both at the state level and at the federal level, they feed into each other, actually both bidirectionally. And it takes a considerable amount of time to build the relationships, get the advocacy, and get the audiences with the people that we need to talk to at Olympia and at the federal level as well. And I think that there's I think if you asked me this 10 years ago, I would have had a very different, maybe a very different position because of the really difficult fiscal position that the city was in. But I have seen the results both at the local, state level and at the federal level come back to us in spades from largely for environmental considerations, culverts, et cetera. And so again, this is not a pushback or anything else. It's more of an observational kind of thing that I've seen. Deputy Mayor Bodie, you raised your hand in the middle of my thought, so please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go
Just
right ahead.
meant To be in the queue.
No. I should stop there because I don't want to blather on, but
Okay.
please, I'd appreciate your insights.
Thank you. I was in an interesting Sound Cities discussion with other deputy mayors and council members on this very point. Because there's a lot of concern that there were too many unfunded mandates and not enough money coming to cities, especially small and medium cities, from the state legislature. And people were talking about what's effective with the state legislature. And it was very interesting that some of the discussion was that the AWC agenda is not that effective, that the individual cities have to lobby early and often to get anywhere. And so I did at the time think that was interesting because I had assumed, kind of like Councilmember Goldman, that even though I've been on council for a while, that AWC was, respected and effective. But it was an interesting observation that these cities, though most of them are more financially secure than we are, have higher revenues, more of a commercial base. They were all feeling like they couldn't rely on AWC and that they were spending a significant amount of individual city time to lobby both their budgetary needs and their policy needs. So I just add that to the mix. I understand exactly what Councilmember Goldman is saying and what Councilmember Lebo is saying. And in the past, when we've had budget discussions, I've been an advocate of never letting our reserves go below 16%, even though, of course, they're reserves. But I also am concerned about how much we're dipping into the unallocated fund balance. And so, from my point of view, I think the provisos are really important. Are there some things that we have in the main budget right now that we should move to the provisos for certain, because we anticipate a possible funding source for them. I also think that if we're going to ask for a levy lift, we need to show that there's reduction without the levy lid lift. So that is part of telling the realistic story of our financial situation that Councilmember Lebo was talking about. So I'll leave it there. Those are my theme. I'm concerned about the provisos, smart use of the provisos, reserves, and use of the unallocated fund balance. So those are my thematic issues. I think that I would just want to say the administration has done an excellent job on this budget, and that doesn't mean my concerns I'm raising don't mean that it wasn't an excellent job to provide city services on a shoestring. I just am thinking about how the best way to package all this.
Yes, Councilmember Goldman, and I want to interject.
So on point to what Deputy Mayor Bodie just said. So if the feeling is that our lobbying is more effective than AWC, then follow-up question, should we be a member of AWC? Are we getting our money's worth from that membership?
Well, Administrator Hill, and then
I don't have an answer to that question, but I just wanted to point out a few things that our state lobbying has gotten us, not as a sales pitch, just the roundabout funding that came through WSDOT was a direct allocation that our lobbyists helped us get. The funding for the Burt Gilman to Town Center studies have been direct allocations from the state legislature due to lobbying.
Excellent.
The Public Works Assistance Fund, we're not the only city that was lobbying for that funding to be put back in place, but it's something that's consistently on the chopping block as the legislature tries to balance their own budget at our expense, because that $2 million we just got for the roundabout came from that fund. And then the one size fits all land use decisions that the legislature keeps wanting to make. The way our voice is heard is thanks in part, well, thanks to our lobbyists, period. They have a good reputation up there. They get a lot of work done on our behalf, and they get it done in a time frame that I don't think we could do. I mean, really, when it comes to coordinating with our lobbyists on a day-to-day basis, that's what I do. And, I get it out to the Legislative Steering Committee for as much review and response as possible, but it moves on such a clip. We couldn't afford to have, our small staff down there through the whole legislative session doing that work. So those are the benefits. It does come at about $3,600 a month cost though for state lobbying.
I would just say, Councilmember Goldman, and before since we're all friends here, just Lori, I just wanted to say, you did not interrupt me. It was a good place for me to stop. So I appreciate your consideration there. I really wanted to hear what you had to say. I would just say, the question about AWC, Sound Cities as well. We have, both organizations have a really great reach, and it amplifies, well, Sound Cities has had some hiccups since Deanna Dawson left for Association of Washington Cities. It still has a considerable amount of deep value, I believe, to our community. That Deputy Mayor Bodie has alluded to or mentioned directly the deputy mayor's meeting, the mayor's meetings, the two that I attend. There's some other meetings. Sound Cities PIC was a very important regional body that helps bring this. It used to be called the Small Cities Association, by the way, which they changed that because people are feeling they weren't setting themselves up for success by calling themselves small. But it really does make a difference, and it's a big that group makes a difference. And I think the Association of Washington Cities, to your point, Mr. Goldman, it represents the communities that are members through the whole state. So you have a little bit of a different perspective on the environment from certain communities than we do. And to Mr. Hill's point, there are other communities that potentially have different opinions, even locally, about growth and density than we might necessarily have. And so having the ability to have Gordon Thomas Honeywell and our friend Mr. Johnson at his firm and the team that I've worked with there over the years through the Lake Ballinger Forum, I really do believe it's a very positive investment. And I also believe that Sound Cities and Association of Washington Cities, as well as the National League of Cities, which we just joined last year or this year, I should say, it makes a tremendous amount of sense for us. We're learning a lot. We simply do not have the opportunity for all of us to be down in Olympia or in Washington and navigate through the political waters there. Deputy Mayor Bodie.
Yes, I do like the question though, and I'm looking at our city memberships list, and I'm looking at some of the big ones. So AWC is a big one, but I agree that Sound Cities and AWC gives us representation as part of a collective that is effective. But do we really need to pay Puget Sound Regional Council? Won't they do fine without our $14,000? And what about the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, $30,000? And the climate group with King County Cities, $35,500. I somehow think that those groups will provide input or seek our input without us paying that much money, but I don't know enough about whether that's mandatory or optional. But those are three I would flag for thinking about, and we could put those in the budget proviso if we had more funds from the general fund that were available to us. So again, I apologize if I'm not understanding these memberships. but
No,
I thought I'd raise the question because that's almost 100K there.
that's fine. And I think we could come back unless we have, I don't want to put staff on the spot. So I think we could come back.
I just wanted to state that we
Please.
definitely are gonna have to look into verify what is actually mandatory versus optional. Because on the spot, we're
Let's-
questioning some of them.
Let's not do math on
So
T. Let's not do math
yeah,
on TV.
We're just gonna have to circle back on that.
Is that,
Yes, so the three I flagged are the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, King County Cities Climate, and Puget Sound Regional Council.
And just so you know, the King County's climate, that's K4C, and that is an optional, but that is part of your whole
program?
climate manager.
I understand if we are in I understand that, but I suspect they would still be an asset to us even without us paying them $35,500 a year. That seems pretty steep for what we get from them.
Colleagues, other comments or questions on topic? Councilmember Lebo.
So part of what we in our retreat talked about is opportunities to improve our grant process. And so is there an opportunity to think about as a grant writer or a grant consultant, whether they're part of the city or as a consultant, to think of them as an investment, that we get a return if we can improve our grant application, which translates into awards. So are there models that we can look at with regard to other cities to say, you know, if we had a part-time, full-time consultant grant writer, that we might see some benefit from that as an investment?
Thank you, Mr. Lebo. Couple thoughts. One, we had conversations with neighboring cities, actually city very far to the south of us, about sharing a grant writer. We can't seem to get a whole lot of traction in regards to sharing a grant writer. I believe very strongly, and I know the staff does as well, about the investment question. We all know that you have to spend the time, do the projects to a certain point, and go out and get the ask for the request the money from the various agencies. And I know that with this budget, I think the concern was whether or not we would be able to afford to have a specific grant writer walking before we run, pun intended, using traffic camera revenues, or having a project manager that writes grants for active transportation. That's only one narrow facet of grant writing, of course. There's environmental grants and there are other things too. So I'd certainly, I know we would all entertain a discussion about how we could formulate, you know, a plan to bring somebody on board part-time or beyond. Mr. Hill, what are your thoughts?
Are there opportunities for consultant grant writers? Because they would then have sort of the wherewithal to look at the broad spectrum and have the expertise where we're not necessarily. Would we have a need for a full-time or a part-time, whereas a consultant could say, you know, I write grants for all the small cities that, and I have a very good success rate.
So to the point of grant writers, I mean, every one of our consulting firms that helps us design a project, which are usually what we go out for grants on, helps us write those grants, and they have in the past, and that's been part of their services. There's always a positive for that if you have a lot of projects that you're going out for grants. The one thing I know it's obvious on this budget, but our deficit is not something that we could cover with grants, and that's the problem. I don't want to say granted, but I just did, sorry. Moving forward, we are going to be looking a lot of active transportation, and that's why the other night I recommended, you know, take it to 10% and then start looking for those grant opportunities so we're not fully funding those. And so we can check and see, but I know that in the past, our previous project manager, everything that he was working on, especially the EV chargers that we just got, that was the consultant helped us write that grant to get that through. And so we do take advantage of those without having somebody on the side. I've had that in the past where they're on retainer and you just pay them for the work that you do. And that has been helpful. But I think it's better if you can use the consultant because they have the expertise in that given field. And then you don't have a grant writer over here has no expertise in, say, a certain type of engineering project. Now they have to be brought up to speed to help fill out that application. So.
I've seen really good experience with people that have the expertise in how to write grants. And that they're not necessarily the technical experts, but they clearly know how to write grants. And that it would seem like there's an opportunity for a consultant who says, you know, there's like scholarships. There's 1,000 scholarships out there. And so let's target the ones that you might be able to go after. And so you combine the technical expertise with somebody who actually knows how to write the grant in such a way that it's the most appealing because they understand the criteria. I used to, when I worked for another state agency, review proposals from other colleges and universities, and there's a very strict guideline in terms of scoring those proposals. And I could tell you those who knew how to do it compared to those who were, you know, technically interesting, but really didn't check all the boxes. And so that ultimately they would score lower even if they had a higher need because they didn't know how to fill out the paperwork.
And if I may,
Yeah,
as someone who's
absolutely.
also reviewed grant applications, some of the institutions where you're asking a grant from, they actually have technical assistants that can assist. And sometimes those who take advantage of that can create better proposals. So not to forget that there's all these opportunities as finding someone who knows where to find them and how to utilize them.
Yeah, thank you. That's where we're good.
So I knew a grant writer about 10 years ago, and they were very good because they know when all these different grants come up. So since they're writing the grants, a lot of these, when they do pop up, they go to the grant writers. So I'm in support of a grant writer myself.
Thank you. We had a former council member who was an expert grant writer, actually, and I know it was a source of frustration for her that we didn't write more grants. So this is a good conversation. Colleagues, other comments or thoughts on point?
Just as a reminder, some of these grants require matching. So it's not a magic bullet. It does come with a budgetary match of some percentage. So we just kind of have to, it's not free money. We have to do our part into the project as well.
So if I may, Mr. Lebo, and colleagues, you're looking for an exploration of a consultant grant writer part-time or some sort of part-time kind of situation. Okay, let's bookmark that and see what we can come up with for opportunities there. And I do believe, with all due respect to our former colleague who's very good at this, it is, and to your point, Mr. Lebo, the engineering side of it is only part of it, or it's technical expertise. It's almost the liberal arts side of it for the writing and knowing having the awareness of when the grants are available. That's really the key, being in the loop. So, Mr. Gold.
Yeah, so regarding a grant writer, is it possible for one person to have the breadth of expertise if they'd be looking at environmental grants and public safety grants and other, throughout the city? Are we going to find someone that has that breadth of knowledge?
If I may, in my experience, I knew a fabulous grant writer, and she knew nothing about what the engineers were doing, but she knew how to write grants. And so what she would do is she'd go back to the engineers and say, this is what I need from you. This is what we need to do in order to write a successful grant. And for the college, their award percentage for number of grants that they applied for went up dramatically because of this individual knew how to target the grants and knew how to write the grants based upon the technical information that came from the engineers. So finding an excellent grant writer is finding the goose with the golden egg.
Thank you, Mr. Lebo. Vice Chair Tony.
And this is probably more of a question directed to the city administrator, but when, let's say we hire a grant writer and when they're successful in writing a lot of grants, which is great. However, is there enough capacity on the city staff side to administer these grants? Because after all, if we have to provide personnel, we're already stretched. So is it feasible to actually have these grants come in?
I think to Councilmember Lebo's point, these would be targeted. You'd have a project that you were moving forward with, you were in design and you were looking for funds to help pay for that. You would have a new park that you purchased that you need grant funding to help with as well. So yeah, I don't think it would just be somebody out writing grants for everything in the world. It would be very targeted. You would bring them in, like I said, with a contract. You reach out to them when you need them. They also reach out to you. They say, here are all these grant opportunities. Do you have anything that fits? We get that with our lobbyists on occasion of, here are these funding opportunities. You have something that fits. And so.
Well, and I know too.
For our size city, I would recommend a contract with someone. Like I said, I've done this before and that's the best route because we don't have the need for somebody full-time.
And on point two, our neighbors in Kenmore have, gosh, I think it has received another 8 or 9 different grants for pedestrian and multimodal active transportation issues. They've I think running total is something over 30 million that they've received, which is pretty extraordinary. And that's just off the cuff, but they're doing a really great job. However, they do have a breadth of department personnel that are capable to write to these various grants and et cetera. Councilor Riddle.
Darn, you told a nice story and I think I forgot what I was gonna say.
Okay, come back to it.
That's what I get for
We
listening to you.
love good stories. Colleagues, other thoughts on this? This is a good conversation. It's a really important one. So let's definitely think about this and figure out where that would be and what it would look like. Again, from the standpoint of transportation, active transportation, we're going to have that partially covered with the project manager. However, to Mr. Lebo's point, and some of your other folks have said, there's some other opportunities here as well. And we want to make sure that we're not missing things at all the levels because there are so many layers. There's a diagram out there someplace about grant funding for road improvements, pedestrian improvements, everything else. And it's like this giant onion with, it's very complex. It's probably 3-dimensional and I just didn't look at it deep enough. But federal, state, the state agencies that administer federal funds, county, it just goes on and on. And being aware of, to your point, Mr. Lebo, of what those opportunities are is absolutely critical. And the deadlines too. We have another deadline coming up at the end of this next month that there's a grant that I want to get done that I've been looking forward to for 7 years. And I think I may just write it myself.
I remembered.
You remember the one I'm
Yeah.
talking about? Yes.
I
Yeah.
remember what I was gonna say.
Oh,
if
no.
you don't
Okay,
mind.
never mind, please.
I think just to remind the council first, we authorized, let's say, the Burke Gilman connector to go up to the 30% because that's kind of where we get our sweet spot to know what it is that we need to go out and get grants for. So as we talk about people coming and saying, there's this grant out there, we also have to be willing to say, okay, can we do the background work to get us to where we can then apply for this grant? Or is it like, okay, that's a great grant, we'll go after it next year, now that we know that we can do that and we have a project that matches it.
Yeah.
We're not quite nimble enough to always be able to say, oh, here's a grant, do you have a project? We could create one. But that's why we go to the 30% design, because that puts us in the position to be, a good look when getting grants.
You bet. And safe routes to schools, 10%. There you go. Enough said. Colleagues, other comments on point? What's your pleasure, everyone? I want to take a time check here. We're at 7:30, bottom of the hour. I didn't know where you like to go. At some point where we can certainly go through, additional departmental questions, et cetera, or however you would like to proceed.
I'm good with I'm good with how far we've carried this discussion this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Lebo. Deputy Mayor Bodie, I wanted to check with you.
Yes, I think that we want to, it's important to me what provisos we have and how we write them. So I'd like to, rather than just see we have provisos for these, 5 or 6 topics, I'd like us to think about them because they really are contingencies. Here is something we're working on and we're trying to get funding for this. The topics that we have right now are GIS, climate, police plus up, public works manager and traffic camera, work. So I think we have some details or expectations for some of those and not for others. So that part's important to me. I'm also thinking about the, potential levy, lid lift proposal. And I think it's going to be important to be able to explain what won't occur without that levy lid lift. It can't be, it doesn't pass, and nothing changes. So I'm trying to think of this budget with that perspective in mind, also recognizing what a big percentage of our budget, policing and public safety is, separate from the traffic issue. So just sharing some of those thoughts that I'm mulling overall in thinking about the final shape of the budget.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Vice Chair Furtoni.
So to your point, Deputy Mayor, would it be the case with that, taking the proviso for the police plus and tying it to the levy lid lift? Would that be a thing?
Correct, and perhaps some other aspects of the budget right now. We have some things we can't change, like dispatch or jail services. But are there some things like, just like looking at the memberships, are there some elements, and I know the chief is gonna hate me saying this, and I really support our police department. I'm more thinking about the sequence of what we're saying and the realism of what we're saying, going forward. So, but yes, that's an example, I think, of what we would, include there.
Deputy Mayor, just and Vice Chair, so the proposal is to have the plus, the additional personnel, both in the PD and in the courts, dependent upon traffic camera.
That's tied to the new
Numbers.
002 fund that was
Yeah.
in the presentation last week. So
What
they're
about the previous +2 that we were talking about? Has that just disappeared then?
those were eliminated in the mayor's proposed budget.
Yeah, we
There
removed-
may be some costs that carry over if those positions are filled. We currently have one filled, but we have retirements by mid-year, and then those would become permanent positions. So we wouldn't have any pluses at that point in time.
I might recommend that those pluses go into the provisos, and be connected to the levy lid lift, since the plus that's in the provisos right now is related to traffic camera revenue. Anyway, just food for thought. I'm not pushing it. I'm just brainstorming right now.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bodie. Couple of thoughts. One, I would like to say that this administration is operating under the assumption that there isn't a levy. This is not, we're making sure this budget is what the community is looking for based upon where we are right now and where we expect we will be regardless of what happens should this community go out for a levy. That is absolutely top of mind every moment of the day, sometimes in the middle of the night too. I want to make sure that we're thinking about that, and to many of your points tonight, doing our homework to make sure that the community understands that this budget is responsible and it is something that that represents what the service levels that they expect. Lori, did you
I
have-
agree, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say, I do think we're going to need to explain what the consequence is if it doesn't pass.
Indeed. I just want to make sure we're you know what I'm saying. I appreciate that, Lori. Thank you very much. The other thing I would say too is to the question of provisos. So we can bring back to you the personnel changes that would be dependent upon certain triggers, if then kinds of statements. So you can see, and going back to Mr. Lebo's question, you can see the direct pass through if certain things happen, and then the ones that are would have to be funded from another source, i.e. general fund revenues or surface water, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we can come up with a slide, one or two slides to bring that point home for your consideration. Does that seem reasonable, Director Vaughn? Okay, no, I'm not, I don't want to commit anybody to work that we'll get there. Colleagues. Okay. Well, we're back to the races again on Thursday. So if you have questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out. And it is, for those of you who haven't been through this before, it is drinking from a fire hose. And that is the best analogy I can think of, because it's a lot to absorb, and there are dependencies that are really challenging to understand. I certainly have to ask questions constantly. Any other thoughts? Okay, with that, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.